So let's go ahead and get rolling. Good evening and happy spring, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our last Nutshell conversation of the season. This Nutshell season, the University of Missouri Center for Agroforestry and the Savannah Institute came together to feature conversations focused on the connections and curiosities between science and the practice of agroforestry and perennial agriculture, with panelists representing on-farm and in-lab spaces. We are so very grateful for all the folks that joined us and all the ideas that were shared. If you have suggestions and comments for future seasons, please fill out a short survey that will make its way to your inbox next week. My name is Katie Adams, and I am the Illinois Community Agroforester at the Savannah Institute, and my co-host is Hannah Hemmelgarn, the Outreach and Education Coordinator at the University of Missouri Center for Agroforestry. I will be facilitating this evening, and Hannah will be helping coordinate audience questions and providing technical assistance behind the screen, behind the scenes and behind the screen. So if you have any questions or issues that come up, feel free to shoot Hannah a question in the chat. Before we begin our evening, we would like to extend gratitude for the lands we occupy and their ancestral stewards. Because we are all from unique geographic locations, we invite you to open the native land map that will link in the chat. As agroforesters, we have a responsibility to recognize, elevate, and support Indigenous peoples and publicly acknowledge their foundational and continued contributions to the practice and spaces in which we work. We also have an obligation to confront white supremacy through our work and build better systems and landscapes for all. So we invite you to take a moment of reflection and intention before we begin tonight's conversation. Thank you so much for all of you. Tonight, we will be learning and reimagining through conversation with Katie Commender and Dr. Sarah Lowe. Katie began her agroforestry career as an Appalachian Sustainable Development's VISTA volunteer and is now their Agroforestry Program Director, where she teaches the next generation of forest farmers. In 2017, she founded the Appalachian Harvest Hub to help medicinal herb farmers sustainably grow, process, and market herbs to premium domestic and international markets. Katie believes that by helping farmers sustainably produce medicinal herbs in both forest farming and alley cropping systems, through conservation through profitable cultivation can be achieved. Since 2018, Dr. Sarah Lowe has served as an associate professor of regional economics and has held the Fred V. Hinkle Chair in Agriculture within the Division of Applied Social Sciences at the University of Missouri. She also directs MU's Extension's Exceed Regional Economic and Entrepreneurial Development Program. Her research focuses on rural entrepreneurship and innovation, local and regional food marketing, food manufacturing establishment dynamics, the relationship between financial capital availability and rural firm survival, as well as the impact of broadband access on rural economic development. Tonight, Katie and Sarah will each share about 15 minutes about their work and then kick off this evening's dialogue. We will then share questions from the audience. If you're joining us from the computer, we invite you to share your questions and comments in the chat box throughout our conversation on this platform at any time. Hannah will monitor them throughout the nutshell and make sure that we address them during the Q&A session at the end. And everyone will be muted throughout the evening for better sound quality. And now on to the main event. We are so pleased to welcome Sarah and Katie tonight. Sarah, could you kick us off?
Great, thanks, Katie. If you stop screen sharing, I will start screen sharing. All right, thank you, perfect. You guys see my screen okay? Yeah, great, awesome. Well, thank you so much for the kind introduction. I am now able to jump to kind of give you guys an overview of what I thought I would talk about today. And essentially today I want to share 3 thoughts from my research on kind of a broad, amorphous type of marketing that I consider direct to consumer, local and regional, place-based, or value-added food marketing. And so the three things I wanted to touch on today were, number one, how the economy affects those of us working in this space. We're coming out of a recession. So I wanted to talk about how high value food sales are related to the macroeconomic cycle. I am a PhD economist. I have worked at the Federal Reserve. I promise not to geek out too much. I also wanted to talk a little bit about processing and food and beverage manufacturing and those opportunities. And finally, I wanted to talk about some of my most recent research looking at online marketing and sales. And I wanted to share some of those thoughts with you. I'm just the researcher. I'm the scientist here today. My ideas are food for thought. And I think my colleague, Katie, will follow up with some really great real world examples after my presentation. So I look forward to that. Let me get started. Consumers matter. As I mentioned, we're coming out of a recession. Hopefully we're coming out of a recession, and consumers matter. A lot of our consumers lost their job, had a reduction in income. Maybe they had a 10% pay cut due to the COVID crisis. Why does this matter? Well, research I did with Jeff O'Hara in 2016 really showed that direct sales, local food sales, some of these specialty food sales are related to the economy. So these sales are very sensitive to consumer income, much more so than regular food. So when consumer income shrinks or declines or even doesn't grow, consumers are very sensitive to these specialty, place-based, high-value foods. So this was research we did in the Northeast. I'm generalizing a little bit to the rest of the US, but we did this research in the Northeast because we had this hypothesis that these high-value foods, it would be easier for producers or agroforesters located close to cities. So our hypothesis was that proximity to a city, or here a metropolitan statistical area, so that's the counties in green, was going to be more beneficial to producers like you. Actually, what we found is that the city matters, but the income, the average income of people in that city mattered more, okay? So that's kind of the context for us right now coming out of this recession is we've got to kind of keep our eye on what are our consumers, how do they feel in their pocketbook? Do they feel steady, stable in their job with their income? Next, I want to talk a little bit about food manufacturing. Just to give you guys an idea, farms or agroforesters included sold about 4 billion in processed foods in 2017. The entire industry was over 750 billion, okay? So to me, this says there's a lot of opportunity for growth in processing. And again, I'm really looking forward to Katie's example of processing with the Herb Hub. So some other tidbits from research that I thought you guys might be interested in. Local food marketing is positively related to these, to manufacturing entrepreneurship, essentially, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in my next slide. There also was some recent research that looked at cottage foods. And so those are foods that you maybe bread that you can bake at home and sell in a direct to consumer environment, such as on farm or in a roadside stand. And that research found that relaxing those regulations did generate economic growth for rural communities. So that's pretty exciting. Moving back to manufacturing more generally, we're seeing a lot of sectors within food manufacturing really growing, right? And this kind of goes back to what I talked about with consumer sentiment. Consumers are really interested in craft beverages right now, okay? So I've got some stats on there about craft distilling, wineries, breweries, those are really taking off. Snack food, food manufacturing, some of these specialty snacks, kind of high value snacks, that's really growing. Other types of food manufacturing right now is declining. So small meat processors, your local locker, some of these smaller meat processors that serve local and regional meat producers, they've been shrinking over the last couple of macroeconomic cycles. And we felt that last year in 2020 when some of the big plants closed and there was a lot of demand for those small meat processors. So again, I think there's a lot of opportunities for producers of value-added food products in the processing sector. This is the entrepreneurship study I was just talking about, I just referenced a minute ago. And this map basically shows the number of food and beverage manufacturing startups in the study period. And this was a study that looked at local context. How does your local environment affect whether you're in a good place to do place-based business, right? And so the results of this study really suggested that place-based agritourism and specialty food consumers really matter. So if you're looking to do some on education, start a processing facility, serve a regional market, serve one of those kind of high metropolitan statistical areas, the research found that being close to highways, having a booming local tourism sector or some agritourism in the area, and scenic amenities were pretty pertinent. Also, in areas where there were a lot of farms doing local foods or selling direct to consumer, that generated more of these food and beverage manufacturing startups. And of course, some of the infrastructure pieces, broadband internet, college educated population, those were associated with food and beverage manufacturing startups. So that's pretty cool. The third thing I wanted to talk about today was online marketing. This is a graph from a paper that came out last November, basically showing the growth in here we have US grocery sales generally online during COVID. Okay, so this massive growth, people were buying 25% more at a time, but online sales grew 450%. But this was local and regional foods sold online at the same time. And so this basket size growth for local and regional foods was amazing, particularly because in some of our markets that we work in, they're high transaction cost. Anytime you as a producer are talking to customers, your transaction costs are going up, right? So when customers started, really growing the amount that they would buy at one time, it helps producers' bottom line, right? Because the transaction costs have been reduced. Just a few fun facts here. 8% of farms with DTC, or what I'm calling direct to consumer, a little bit kind of synonymous with local foods, 8% of those farms had an online marketplace in 2015. And I'm really looking forward to results from the more recent version of this survey, which was conducted in 2020. This is from the Local Foods Marketing Practice Survey that USDA conducts. So we're looking forward to seeing what those numbers were in 2020. I think a lot of folks set up online platforms, tried to do more online sales. Interestingly, 72% of those online sales were local, which means that more than a quarter of those online sales were non-local. So this suggests that the online sales are really a great way to sell specialty products, high value products outside of your community. So this graph shows farms that had an online marketplace and their average sales versus farms that didn't. So as you might expect, the producers that have an online marketplace are larger producers. But what I really want to highlight here is that they sell a lot through on-farm stands. So that goes back to this consumer thing. They're connecting with consumers face-to-face, much more so than those doing it without online. And I think that they're leveraging that face-to-face connection that they've had, so subsequent sales can be online, essentially. Sorry, I'm moving my cursor around. So here's just a few tidbits on value-added marketing. Online and in-person marketing are really important for farms selling things like, specialty milk, wine, jam, meats, cheeses, chestnuts. A lot of those online sales were value-added products, right? The value-added products, those processed products, are easier to ship. So Katie's going to talk to us about, processing her herbs. That's going to make that easier to ship. So these value-added sales are more conducive to online marketing, and frankly, they put more money in consumers' pockets too. The caveat, of course, is that you as producers need high-speed, reliable internet to be doing this kind of marketing online. Multivariate regression is a very technical term. Let me summarize this slide and say that the research found online sales were a way to access customers in high-income areas without producing in high-income areas. So if you think back to that first slide where we talked about the high-income metro areas, those people, you know, in a booming, when the economy is growing, they want to buy these high-value place-based foods. The online sales, frankly, allow you to produce foods in where food should be produced and market in those high-income areas. We also looked at beginning farmers and their use of online sales. We found a couple cool things, particularly the online sales was particularly pertinent for the farmers located in remote rural areas. But I think most importantly, the online markets were part of the business model for new producers located in remote rural areas. They really were much more likely to tap those rich urban markets. It seems like they're premising their business model around that. So with that, let me kind of conclude. You know, I've talked a little bit about consumers, and hopefully we're on an upward trajectory here with the economy. Consumers are going to have more money to spend on high value products, but producers, growers, agroforesters, you guys love to produce, right? You're not economists, you're not into marketing, you're probably not into finance. And so how do we balance this marketing, processing, storage, aggregation, transportation? How do we balance the love of producing sustainably, doing good for the environment, but also doing these other more business-like functions in a manner that's sustainable for your business? So I'm really I always try to look forward to the future, and I'm interested in what kind of marketing techniques, what sort of consumer demand we're going to see in the future dominating production essentially in this sector. So with that, I will save questions until after my colleague Katie has presented, and then we'll have a little discussion, but feel free to put questions in the chat, and I think Hannah will get them teed up while we're presenting. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for that great overview and good questions to follow into Katie's presentation next. So Katie, go ahead and feel free to share your screen, and the spotlight is yours.
Okay. Can you see the first slide here? Yeah, okay, got a thumbs up from Sarah. Thank you, Sarah, for teeing this up so well. I was thinking a lot about, in most of the slides that you were presenting, about just sort of how ASD fits in, and sort of the research that you've done really brings to light a lot of what we've seen in Central Appalachia, where Appalachian Sustainable Development is based. So it's good to know that that's backed up with some research too. I'm not just imagining things. But I'm Katie Commander, and if you hear a meow in the background, that's my cat Merlin. Not much I can do about him. He's hungry. But like I said, I'm the Agroforestry Director with Appalachian Sustainable Development. We're a nonprofit based right here in Washington County in far, far Southwest Virginia. So this is actually Northeast Tennessee here where I live in Bristol. And we've been operating in Southwest Virginia and Northeast Tennessee since 1995, really working in the sustainable agriculture sector, and trying to create healthy communities that respects the planet and also cultivates profitable opportunities for farmers and producers in Appalachia. And I'm going to talk a little bit today about one of our many, many programs called the Appalachian Harvest Herb Hub, based right here in Scott County, Virginia. And this was created in 2017, nested within our food hub facility. So our food hub has been around since about 2000. and is really designed to help organic and conventional fruit and vegetable farmers who are rural. So we're talking, several hours away from big cities. This is where the produce, these are where the herbs are being produced, but they were having trouble accessing some of those big city markets where consumers with higher income spending is available, right? So the Food Hub was really designed to help work with multiple farmers throughout a rural landscape where the food is being produced, aggregate that product here in our big coolers, and then we have 52-foot tractor trailers where we load up the produce and then we ship it to grocery store distribution centers up and down the East Coast so that farmers can access markets. So we realize that there's a need beyond just produce. There's a lot of really great native Appalachian forest botanicals that can be grown in the forest understory in a forest farming system. So things like American ginseng, black cohosh, blue cohosh that are native to the Appalachian Mountains. And there's also a variety of field-grown medicinal herbs, whether it's peppermint or calendula or chamomile. And folks were having a hard time accessing markets for some of those crops too. So we expanded our Food Hub to include an Herb Hub, and it basically offers a lot of the similar services that our Food Hub has since 2000. And these include things like seed to sale training. So we work with farmers all the way from, how to propagate medicinal herbs, how to process them, all the way through sale. And then with grant funding, we can offer cost share services as well. So, for example, we might be able to offer 50% of the startup costs for planting stock, or help offset maybe the costs of certain certifications that farmers might need to access markets. And then the two areas that I'm going to focus mostly on today are processing and marketing services. So at our facility in Duffield, it's about a 15,000 square foot facility for both our food and our Herb Hub. The Herb Hub is a tiny little corner into the Food Hub, but we offer washing and drying equipment, commercial resizing equipment to really help producers create a value-added product that's shelf-stable that can be marketed for premium prices. And to do so with our aggregation and marketing services, we're working with a network of medicinal herb farmers throughout Central Appalachia and offering aggregation services so that, if I'm a farmer and I can only produce a small amount, and a buyer has a certain volume minimum, I wouldn't be able to access that market alone. So we pool supply together through a network of farmers to help meet wholesale volume minimums. And then we get advanced purchase orders and contract farming agreements for producers in our region so that they're able to grow for secured markets. So I'll talk a little bit first about some of our processing equipment that we have. We have some basic root washing tables that we have outside for farmers to use just to knock off some of the immediate dirt. This here is black cohosh being processed. I think this was the fall of 2017. And we got a stainless steel cement mixer that we can put the roots in and add some water and just press a button and it'll agitate it and knock off even more of the dirt to get it really clean before we put it in our dryers. And we've got a variety of dryers at the Herb Hub. This is an Excalibur commercial dehydrator. It has two different zones, so we could have two different types of herbs going at the same time with different temperatures. We just built out a drying room that's insulated and has fans and dehumidifiers in it. That's more of a medium scale size dryer. And then Gaia Herbs donated this very large tobacco dryer. It's about 40 foot by 10 foot that we can put a number of different herbs in. And then some of the buyers that we work with are looking for material to be resized. So if you think about, the size of the herbs that you might get in a tea bag, for example, it's not these big leaves, right? They're shredded down into smaller pieces, often in a process that's called garbling. So we have garbling screens where you can use your hands to press the leaves and the stems against a screen, and it'll crush them up into smaller pieces and they'll fall down into a bucket. And then we have this small scale wood chipper that we can use for soft roots and also aerial portions or above ground portions like leaves and stems and flowers as well. And part of the training that we offer at the Herb Hub is any purchase order that we have come in from a buyer, we work with the buyer to understand what their specifications are. And then we communicate that with the farmers that we work with, and we train them one-on-one so that if we have multiple farmers supplying a single buyer, we can assure that the herbs are processed in the same way and they look the same for uniformity, which is a big thing with the buyers that we work with. And then we also work with farmers. We buy bulk packaging and labeling supplies, and we have that available at our facility in Duffield, Virginia. And we work with farmers to come up with a lot number system. So this is really important for the wholesale herbal products companies that we're working with. They want to be able to trace back the supply that they're getting from us to the farm, right? And so this number right here is a unique grower number for this particular farmer right here. And then this is the Julian calendar day of harvest. The year of harvest, this was harvested in 2017. This is the field number, and then this last number here, the 01, is the crop code. So for each crop that goes through our facility, we have a list of herbs, and 01 happens to be black cohosh, which they're packaging right here. So we provide this training to farmers too, so this way we have a sense of traceability in case, heaven forbid, if there was ever a rejection, for example, from a buyer or a recall for something in a wholesale market, it can be traced back to the individual farm. One of the things that I'm working specifically on with the Herb Hub is really trying to create premium price markets for medicinal herbs that are grown in a sustainable manner. So if forest botanicals are grown in a forest farming system, versus harvested from the wild, there's a lot more inputs that go into that for cultivating that product. And so it's important that we are able to market it in a way where consumers understand that it's being sustainably grown in a farming system. And with that labeling, like a forest grown verified certification, for example, that you see here, we're able to receive premium prices because consumers know that it's harvested in a sustainable and legal manner, and not over harvested in the wild, which unfortunately a number of these forest botanicals often are. So what we've been able to see with that over time, in this chart here, average wild harvested prices for a number of the native Appalachian forest botanicals are here from the Virginia Tech Root Report. These are back in 2014. I think they might have some more recent data on the Root Report's website. But just for example, black cohosh back in 2014 was going for around $3.50 a dry pound. I think it's up to around maybe $4 a dry pound now. But if we look at this black cohosh root that was pictured in the slides previously, it takes about 20 to 25 plants to make a dry pound. And it takes roughly 7 years for that plant to grow to a mature age for harvest. So we're not talking about tomatoes, we're talking about long-term perennial crops that really require an investment to cultivate. And so for $3.50 a dry pound, it's not economically viable to grow that crop. So what we've been able to do with marketing products as forest farms and really beginning to understand the true cost of production with the farmers that we work with is market those products and get higher premium prices. So now we're seeing upwards of $45, sometimes $60 a dry pound for like forest grown verified and organic certified for forest farm botanicals that are grown sustainably. And this is just sort of an example of the aggregation model that I was referencing before. What we do each winter is I'll go out and I'll work with a network of herbal products companies throughout the United States and into Canada to secure advanced purchase orders for the farmers that we work with. And if a particular buyer needs 100 pounds of something, but the individual farmers we work with, maybe one can only supply 25, another can only supply 15, 40, or 20, alone, they won't be able to access that market. But together at the Herb Hub, what we can do is aggregate and pool that supply from a network of farmers and sell it as an aggregated batch of herbs that can then be put into a value-added product like the tincture you see here. And then we also work with buyers on contract farming agreements too. So with a number of the medicinal herb species we work with, like black cohosh, for example, it's going to take 7 years to grow. A big risk factor for farmers are, am I going to even have a market in 7 years after I've spent all this time growing the product? So with contract farming agreements, we can work with buyers to get a secured demand for 7 years in advance. And farmers know exactly how much they are able to sell, for what price, that's then negotiable every year thereafter, and they have a secured market, and it takes some of the guesswork and risk factors out of it. So this is, just want to share a few case study examples to wrap up of some of the farmers that we work with. This is Michelle Pridgeon. She's in Grayson County, Virginia. She's one of the first forest farmers that we worked with back in 2017 when we opened the Herb Hub. And she is the farmers market manager in her community in Independence. She's been growing flowers and vegetables on her farm for a number of years. But back in the holler, the trees are starting to grow in and shade out her garden, and she was looking for some alternative crops to grow. And she came upon some black cohosh, this plant that you see right here, growing in her woods for about 10 acres in her woods. So she's using a method of forest farming called wild stewardship, where she's going out and she's sustainably managing wild existing populations of black cohosh. She's only harvesting mature plants that are fruiting. She's waiting for the mature plants to produce seed and replanting those seeds. And every time she harvests a root, she's breaking off a portion of that rhizome and putting it back in the ground to really ensure that there's regenerative supply year after year after year. She's not making a harmful impact on that population. And one of the things that a unique case with Michelle is that in 2016, before the Herb Hub opened, she was marketing Forest Farm Black Cohosh to a buyer for $25 a dry pound, which is still a pretty good increase from that $3.50 we're seeing. But what she was realizing is when she was taking, she loves producing, Sarah, like you were saying, but the processing side of things was a challenge. And doing that at a home scale with a tiny toothbrush in October, scrubbing roots in a sink. And she went and she bought a little tiny tabletop dehydrator from Cabela's, and she was having to harvest multiple batches to put the roots in that dryer. What she found out is that her cost of production was $78 a dry pound. She actually ended up losing a lot of money. So we had lots of conversations with Michelle and farmers like her to try to figure out, if we open this Herb Hub, what would be helpful to include? And so commercial washing, drying, resizing equipment that we got at the Herb Hub was really helpful. And then also just really, she wanted some more assistance with marketing the material. So really understanding what the buyer specifications were. One of Michelle's challenges that she had is all the little fiber roots. She ended up cutting those off because one of the pictures that the buyer had sent, it looked like those were all broken off. So she actually ended up reducing her overall volume accidentally. So really training farmers on what buyers really mean and what their specifications are is a service that we're able to provide with Michelle's input. And we're able to bring her price up to $60 a dry pound in 2017. And with all the services that we're able to offer at the Herb Hub, we reduced her break-even price down to $44 a dry pound. So her labor costs went from $78 to $44, and she was actually able to make a profit on farming black cohosh. So that was an exciting discovery. We're actually offering some services that are really helping farmers. And then lastly, I just want to share Blake Dillman is another great farmer that we work with in Tazewell County, Virginia. He's growing on about 5, maybe a little more than that now, of a variety of different native forest botanical species. So American ginseng, black cohosh, blue cohosh, bloodroot. golden seal and Solomon seal. And like Michelle, he's implementing the wild stewarded method, but the bulk of what he's growing is what's called wild simulated forest farming. And that's when you're basically cultivating these botanicals mimicking nature. So exactly how they would grow in nature, not necessarily a monocropped row of golden seal and then ginseng, but they're all intercropped and interplanted together in an integrative system. And one of the exciting things that we've been working on with Blake is contract farming agreements for things like golden seal that might take a really long time to grow, to try to mitigate some of that risk so he has a secure market in the end. So with that, I'll just open it up to some questions for both Sarah and and I guess we're going to be asking each other some questions first, right?
That's right.
Okay.
That was great, Katie. I love it when I get to see some real world examples. It makes the research and the data crunching, the number crunching seem like it's paying off. So I'm really excited to hear particularly those case studies with Michelle and Blake. I think that's really great. And I'm really fascinated by the price premium that Michelle was able to garner with the help from the hub. One thing I'll say from my work, so I worked in Washington, D.C. for a long time using farm level data. So if those of you out there get the Census of Agriculture or the ARMS survey, I encourage you to complete those surveys. And it was always amazing to me using those farm level financial data that, I'm in a skiff, essentially. The data are very safe. Don't worry, there's no identifying information. But being able to look at farm level data and seeing, the surveys ask, what is the labor? There's so many producers out there, Katie, that don't assign any value to their time, to their labor. So I was glad to see Michelle doing that. And it sounds like this wild simulated or some of these methods are fairly cost effective in that they're not requiring a lot of labor. Most of the labor seems to be on the harvest side of things. Is that appropriate?
Yeah, most of the labor is on the harvest side of things, but commercial equipment seems to be helping to reduce those post-harvest expenses. It's just very expensive for one individual farmer to make that upfront investment, to then wait several years on a return, especially for a crop that's going to take 7 years to grow. So as a nonprofit, that's something that we're able to offer our community through grant funding to purchase that expensive equipment and make it shared use for all the farmers in our community. But I think you bring up a really good point, because one of the things I always say to farmers that we work with is that it's really hard for me to market your products as premium forest farm products if I don't know what your cost of production is. And if you don't track that data, I've had buyers specifically, they're willing to pay way more than 10 times the going rate that they typically pay for forest botanicals, because I can show them a table that breaks down, this is actually what it costs a farmer to grow it. And they're like, wow, we never knew that. I had no idea it cost that much. But if we want to invest in a sustainable supply, we're willing to pay that. And thank you for showing us how much it costs. So that's really important information to keep track of.
That's great. Yeah, the power of information. And I love that you've been able to use that with clients to show them that they really do need to pay. They seem like they want to do things sustainably, and knowledge is power, right? So that's great. So I encourage all of you out there who are producers or working with producers to help them with their financials, help them track these sorts of things so that they do have an accurate cost of production. That's awesome, Katie.
Yeah. So it was exciting for me to listen to your presentation, because like I said, I always thought, well, am I imagining these things? But some of the data in your research actually, brings it to light. And I think oftentimes people ask us, well, why do you have a food and herb hub in rural America? Why are you not closer to Richmond or Roanoke? And we're like, well, it's because the farmers are in rural America, but there's just not enough markets locally for the amount of production that can happen. And so, I think by having the hub where we can aggregate, we're able to then ship it out to those city centers where a bulk of the volume of the market is. At the same time, trying to develop local markets as well.
Yep. Well, as an economist too, a lot of the work that I do is economic impact. So I'm always thinking about how can I grow rural communities? How can I make the economy in a rural community sustainable so that schools, businesses, churches can stay in business? So that's kind of what I do. And frankly, exporting those goods, exporting them to the city or to outside consumers actually helps the local economy quite a bit, because you're bringing money, say, from Washington, D.C. into Southwest Virginia, whereas when you're spending locally, you're not bringing in that money. So this is just as good as having a big factory in terms of the economy, but much better for the environment, more sustainable, more natural, hopefully more enjoyable for working in this field too.
And some of, part of what you were saying about the online sales and agritourism, some of the most successful herb farms that I know, they have farm tours, and they're encouraging people to come to their farm to see what they're growing, or they might have a U-Pick, or they might have an herbal CSA, and they're working with other farmers in their community who are providing fruits and vegetables and adding herbs onto it. Or they might have an online market where they're selling herbal value-added products. Like Blake, for example, he's not only wholesaling through the Herb Hub, but he makes ginseng tea out of the leaves, and he's selling that online.
Yeah, perfect example of value added. Let me go back just to what you said, the agritourism piece. I think education is so important. And if someone is using one of these products, it would be great to get them on the farm. And I love that the producers are cooperating. Just like we have a wine trails map, I hope that you're developing something in terms of sustainable agritourism for the region so that people can maybe come from Washington, D.C., let me just use as an example again, for the weekend, stay there, patronize the local restaurants, the local Airbnb, I suppose, and really learn and bring something back to the city and help their peers understand how important it is to be sourcing this stuff sustainably in an ecological way that helps the economy in rural areas, but also helps the environment.
Yeah, a lot of the forest farmers and field-grown medicinal herb farmers we work with will have workshop days on their farm where they'll provide education about, how to stratify ginseng seed and how to harvest X, Y, and Z crop and, things like that. And it's fun for people to come, and it provides some free labor too sometimes for farmers.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Katie, there's a question in the chat for you. Let me read it to you. Are the tools you're using at the Herb Hub what the industry is also using, i.e. inspired by the creativity of multi-purpose instruments like your cement mixer?
I would say some of what we use is based on a small nonprofit budget. So, I mean, there are very large root washers out there where the whole thing is made of stainless steel and they cost several $1,000s. Whereas we got a Cushland stainless steel cement mixer. It does the same thing, and it was $1,000, or wait, I think it was $800 because we asked. There was one with some minor scratches and blemishes, so they gave us a discount. So that's a good tip too. Ask for the ones that are slightly blemished. But yeah, I mean, we're sometimes we have large grants and sometimes we don't. So I wish I had a picture of my PowerPoint of our drying room, because originally it started out as we didn't have a budget to build a room with walls that are insulated and an actual door. So we got 2x4s and we built a frame, and then we got a sheet of plastic and we wrapped the whole room, the ceiling and the walls, with plastic. And we stuck a fan and a dehumidifier and a heater in there. And that was our makeshift, $150, not even that, dryer, probably a $75 dryer. So you can make do with what budget you have, that's for sure.
Definitely. Great. Questions from others?
Katie, I have another question here for you, unless the other Katie wants to jump in.
Go ahead.
So I am just surprised. There are some other forest botanicals based on their status or their value for their uses that are super valuable, more valuable than black cohosh. So why is it that more folks aren't focusing specifically on those high value herbs?
I would say for ginseng, we do have farmers growing American ginseng, and for organic certified and forest grown verified in a forest farm system, sustainably grown, I think we're getting upwards of $1,150 a dry pound. So it's extremely high value. But as you can imagine, a crop that brings in that kind of income also comes with some big risks. So theft is a huge issue. And I'm not talking about theft from, oops, there's my cat. I'm not talking about theft from your deer, although, you might have some predation from them too. I'm talking about, people coming onto your property and stealing a crop that you might have been growing for a really long time. It's a big, big issue where we are. And it's one that we don't really have the best solutions for. I mean, you can get game cameras and you can put no trespassing signs on, but it's a sad story that I hear more often than not. So it's definitely one that comes with a high risk.
Okay, thanks. And Sarah, I was curious, you talked about the increased access maybe for sales from the producer side using more online marketing. How does that relate to the consumer side? Are you saying, you mentioned that it's these rich urban areas that are the purchasers? Are people in lower income areas and rural areas, are they also able to take advantage of these online options?
Yeah, that's a great question, Hannah. Honestly, I don't do a lot of research on the consumer side of things. Economists tend to focus either on the producer side, and that's me. I don't know as much about the consumer side. My priors are that access and equity are probably not enhanced with online sales. My prior would be that, frankly, if a producer can have the rich urban consumer in an urban area, that might even reduce the available. They might trade names or make available locally at a lower price. So the online sales probably do not help in terms of access and equity, frankly. I haven't seen any empirical research on that. I'm sure folks are starting to work on that now. There's just been such growth in this area. I'm a believer though. I mean, I'm kind of for folks living in rural areas, and I believe that if the producer, the farmer in a rural area can benefit, the entire rural area will benefit economically, and that can lift up the households that are lower income in that rural area.
That makes sense. Yeah, thank you.
Katie and Sarah, I have a question for you both. Do you have any suggestions about how farmers and those of us who work with farmers can tell our stories better to add value to our products? Katie, I was amazed to see those jumps in price for black cohosh after you spent time educating the buyers, and what a boon for the producers themselves.
Yeah, I think part of that education, like Sarah, we were talking about, is really understanding the cost of production. A lot of the buyers really just had no idea what that cost of production really was. So I think that was part of it. I think another reason why we're seeing bumps in prices for sustainably forest farmed forest botanicals is because a number of these plants are starting to see declines in wild populations, whether it's from overharvesting, habitat loss. A lot of farms in this area have cattle in the woods and other, animals that are eating some of these botanicals. And so as an industry, if they want to continue to supply these wonderful herbs to consumers, I think buyers are really starting to see a need to invest in a sustainable supply chain so they can ensure that these products are here for the future. And consumers are really starting to see some of the sustainability issues in certain supply chains like the forest botanical supply chain, and they're demanding and requesting and willing to pay more for those botanicals. So that, I think, is one of the big tie-ins with the forest botanicals. And then for some of the buyers that we work with, they really want to support local farmers, specifically in areas where a lot of the forest farmers that we work with are in coal impacted areas where there's a decline in jobs, and really trying to provide economic opportunities, and they really want to help invest in local and support local. So I think those are sort of the three ways that we've been able to help tell that story.
I would like to add in on the marketing side of things. There's marketing to consumer. I think those of us who support producers should also be thinking about marketing to farmers. And so Katie and I not long ago talked about, hey, farmers need to keep track of their costs so that they can tell the buyer what their cost of production is. But I think we should also encourage the farmers that we're trying to support to keep track of that data, just so that they can better understand why they need to do some value added marketing or why they need to do some specialty processing. And I think it would be great. I really love the stories about Michelle and Blake. I think it'd be great to do, maybe people have already done this, like 2-minute YouTube segments, producer to producer, where a farmer just does a 2-minute video, says, this is what I did, and get that out there and get the conversations going. And I think they could inspire colleagues. It could be, it could be worldwide. But I think farmers love to learn from other farmers. They do not love to learn from professors at universities, okay? But so that's me wearing my professor hat saying, what can I do as an extension faculty member to help connect producers, help them be entrepreneurial, be innovative, and tap those higher value markets? And things like fact sheets and little 2-minute videos that might be posted to social media, I think are more effective than we sometimes think.
Thanks so much. I feel like I have a lot to take with me as I'm thinking about myself as a producer, as well as all the farmers I work with. A question from Michael in the chat is, I think directed to Katie, how are you marketing ginseng? Are you marketing ginseng directly into the international market?
No, that is one crop that we are not marketing internationally. We're working on developing a domestic market for ginseng where sustainable forest farming practices are valued. Oftentimes, American ginseng that's sold into international market, for those who are not as familiar, is sold largely to an Asian market. So you're looking at, China, Korea, countries in Asia who really value ginseng for many, many, many years. I think American ginseng was first sold internationally to Asia 300 years ago, right? So we're talking, it's a very long, deep-rooted history. And they're willing to pay high dollar value for roots that look as wild as possible. And so sometimes, depending on the forest farming system you're using, the roots that are being grown in a cultivated setting may not look as wild as they would if they're plucked out of the wild, right? And so you might not get as high of a premium price in an international market for forest farm botanicals. So we're trying to focus more so on building up a domestic market for sustainably forest farmed botanicals. With that said, I have heard recently that there's largely a younger generation within the Asian market for American ginseng that is looking for more sustainably sourced forest farmed ginseng. And they're starting to be interested in shifting towards that way. I'm not necessarily sure what the price difference would be. We'd have to look into that, but that was something that I just recently learned that was a new development for me. I didn't realize that before.
That is really interesting. Sarah, did you have anything to add on to that?
No, I'm learning.
Likewise. I just wanted to ask too, in thinking about, the importance of education and marketing, how cooperatives can play into that too. I mean, I think about the Herb Hub. sort of like a cooperative. And Katie, maybe you can share a little bit more about how that works with producers.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of producer-owned cooperatives. They really make all the difference. Think about dairy co-ops in Wisconsin. The cooperative model really enabled dairies to flourish, to negotiate, to work together. And the best part was they're all producer-owned, right? So the profits, once they're realized, go back to the producers, and a lot of times they invest that back into their farm, into their facilities, into their animals. And so I think producer cooperatives would be great. I mean, it sounds like, Katie, your model is more of the nonprofit model. You're pursuing grants, but I think, if this becomes more widespread, if grants were to become harder to find, I think a producer cooperative model would work well. What do you think, Katie?
Yeah, I think so. I know there are a number of examples of cooperatives in our area. The Herb Hub is following largely suit the model of our food hub that's been around since 2000, and it's a nonprofit social enterprise program. So it acts like a business, but it's mission driven. And so kind of the way that the food hub and the herb hub is set up is that there are certain business-like activities, like our operational expenses out at our facility, that are covered by a sales commission. But then there are other activities like our training and our education and our cost share programs and our on-farm technical assistance that's never going to be covered by a sales commission. That's more of the mission-driven focus of the work that we do, that's more grant funded. And in some cases, we have a private industry investment in things like that.
Great. Yeah, I want to encourage people who are in states that have a legal structure that's very conducive to cooperatives. So the producer cooperative model is highly regulated at the state level. And so some states like Wisconsin are very favorable to producer cooperatives. So if you're in a state where that's a favorable sort of thing, I think that's a very viable legal structure to think about. And I think, the education, marketing, cooperatives are all there for each other. And it's kind of like aggregating in a food hub, except you're maybe pooling your resources to have someone dedicated to opening up new markets or helping you add value.
Great, thank you. I have one more question to close us out before we end our time together. And for both of you, as a producer, besides labor, what's the one other piece of data that you would suggest that I track that I might not be tracking right now?
I think yield is an important piece of data to keep tracking. Yeah, I know we oftentimes get the request from new farmers of, if I grow a 100-foot row, what's going to be my average yield? And sometimes with a number of these crops, there's not a whole lot of research or publication out there on that. So unless we have a farmer in our network who's grown it before, we don't really have a reference point. And so it makes it really difficult when we're trying to secure purchase orders and we know what a buyer wants and we want to backtrack that demand into plant populations that need to go in the ground, but we don't know what the yield is. So that's a really important piece of information to keep track of.
I'm a data person, Katie. I think I would track it all. Let me close with one additional reason why you might want to track more than you're tracking as a producer. And that's accessing loans, government programs. We're seeing government programs become more and more available to alternative crops. And one of the biggest stumbling blocks, one of the biggest barriers to USDA helping specialty crops is this lack of data. They don't, that you can't make a loan. We have no idea what the loan guarantee would be without the data. So if producers can pool that information somehow, I know it's confidential and it's kind of deeply personal and financial information, but those, as economists say, information asymmetries are a big stumbling block for Washington helping people like you.
Thanks so much. I gotta start tracking more of my data so I can help folks get more money for their agroforestry projects.
I have lots of forms I can send you, Katie. They're so
I love
exciting.
forms. I love forms, so I'm happy to receive them.
Easier said than done, we know.
Well, Sarah and Katie, thank you so much for your time, your work, your expertise, and for sharing your stories and the great conversation that came through the collaboration tonight. We're very thankful to have the Nutshell Conversation series and lots of great producers and researchers join us. So from Hannah and I and Savannah Institute and the Missouri Center for Agroforestry, thank you so much for spending your evening with us, and we'll look forward to seeing you at the next Nutshell Conversation series. Happy planting, happy spring, everyone.
Happy spring.
Thank you. Thanks for having us. Have a great
Thank
summer,
you.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
I'm gonna go feed my cat.
Thanks again and have a wonderful evening.
Bye.